talk now to my colleague, Simon Marks. He is in Washington, D.C. He has been listening to that particular media briefing. Simon, good evening to you. Our time. I've got to start with this word that was clarified at the media briefing and whether or not it applied when South Africa was summoning Mr. Bozell to the meeting with DIRCO officials, and the word is demarched. Mr. Bozell was demarched to the building of DIRCO, and that word, Simon, it's used by governments to either communicate a protest or object to certain actions by a foreign government. How is Washington going to view this latest action?
Well, I think it depends, Xoli, on which part of Washington you're talking about. The Trump administration is clearly going to be deeply irked by all of this, but I think many analysts of foreign policy and diplomatic traditions on the part of the United States will not be entirely surprised. As we have reported here on Newzroom Afrika 405, the appointment of Brent Bozell was always going to be potentially incendiary in South Africa. This is not a personality known for being particularly diplomatic here in Washington, D.C. He's someone who has a long personal history of deep ideological conviction and now backing of President Donald Trump's Make America Great Again and America First priorities. And from the moment he arrived in South Africa, I think many observers here would argue that it was only a matter of time before there was some kind of confrontation, that it has come this early in his tenure and resulted in that demarche, which is a formal carpeting of the ambassador by the host government, in this case, of course, South Africa, and really a warning. I mean, it's one stop short of expulsion, and were there to be further examples of this kind of behavior, I mean, further demarches are always possible, but I think that the ambassador essentially is on notice now that his behavior is not, from the South African government's perspective, in keeping with diplomatic traditions, diplomatic protocols, and, as we heard there, diplomatic etiquette. I do think it is important to underscore that while we were hearing from South African officials there that Ambassador Bozell apologized and expressed regret for the comments that he'd made during that meeting at DIRCO, the officials also said that the ambassador had apologized on Twitter. He has not apologized on Twitter. The embassy has published a message on its account on X, in which the ambassador says, "Thanks to biznews.com for hosting me yesterday. I want to clarify," that's the word that he used, that's the verb, to clarify, that while my personal view, like that of many South Africans, is that kill the Boer constitutes hate speech, the US government respects the independence and findings of South Africa's judiciary. That is a very carefully worded statement that the embassy on the ambassador's behalf has put out over the course of the last several hours. But you don't hear the word apology in there, and you certainly don't hear the word regret in there. It is a clarification, and the ambassador is basically saying, I said something that I personally believe. It's not official US government policy. So when we were told in the briefing that he'd apologized to the South African public over X, that is not true. He has expressed a clarification, but no apology and no regret publicly, even if one was proffered to DIRCO privately behind closed doors earlier today.
Yeah. Simon, something else as well came up as it relates to the 5 demands. We now know that those demands stem from the tariff negotiations, and so the United States put these forward. And I'm going to extrapolate just one because the minister did touch on it as part of South Africa's domestic laws that have got to be abided by if a company wants to set up shop here. And I'm going to read them from a News 24 piece here. And it's actually the last one. And it says, I quote, ending mandatory surrender of ownership or control of corporate decision-making as a cost of doing business. Ronald Lamola, the minister, going some distance here to say that we will never tell America how to do business because this is a domestic policy. Double standards from the Trump administration, given what they wanted to do when it came to one particular app, which I'm going to remember in a moment, Simon, unless you do recall what that was when America wanted to take over the ownership of that particular app if it was to be used in America.
Yeah, I think you're talking about TikTok, and particularly efforts by the United States governments, successive governments, started with the Biden administration, to say to the Chinese that they could not continue to own and operate the version of TikTok that was being used in the United States, and it required the divestment of TikTok from its Chinese owners amid security concerns that the American government had been raising about the personal use of TikTok by Americans while it was Chinese owned. That still has not been fully resolved. The Trump administration has continued to kick that ball into the long grass, and it will be an issue that comes up, I'm sure, during President Trump's upcoming state visit to China as the guest of President Xi Jinping. Look, I think these five demands, and Minister Lamola sort of, I think, conceded there that these five demands have been conveyed to Pretoria. He said that many of them had been raised during that very contentious White House meeting with President Ramaphosa last May. Are a demonstration of the fact that many foreign policy analysts here do not think that the Trump administration is particularly solicitous in terms of recognizing the sovereign right of other countries' governments to run their own affairs. And indeed, certainly as far as the military action that the United States has taken against Venezuela and Iran over the course of the last 2 months, there is copious evidence therein of a disregard for other countries' sovereignty. But also you can see it in some of the reaction to European governments, and particularly the way in which they have reacted to President Trump's decision to invade Iran. US diplomats in post in those European countries, like the government here back in Washington, D.C., accused of riding roughshod over the sovereign right of those governments to make decisions for themselves. And what you see in these five demands really are an effort overwhelmingly to say to the South African government, if you want to carry on doing business, both diplomatic business and literal commercial business with the United States, and remember that this president uses trade as a much broader tool of governing policy. I mean, it is a central pillar, the threat of tariffs, not just to his trade policy, but to his foreign and national security policy. These five demands are essentially saying to the South African government, you're going to snap to attention and run your country the way in which we want your country to be run. Otherwise, there will be consequences. And like other governments all over the world that find themselves on the receiving end of similar but obviously different requests and overtures by the Trump administration, the South African government will argue that it is the sovereign government in charge of events in South Africa, and it is not legally or in any sense required simply to snap to attention and agree to demands that are being made against it. So this is all in keeping with a much broader picture. We are living in an era in which the Trump administration marches to a completely different drumbeat than any of its predecessors here. It is imbued with loyalists from the Make America Great Again and America First movements who are ideological purists. And as they travel the world to represent the Trump administration in embassies all over the world, they are pushing that ideological purity to the max in a bid to try and bend other governments to their will. And that's what's playing out so dramatically today in South Africa.
Simon Marks, thank you very much, as always, putting things into perspective for us, talking to us primarily on the back of the media briefing by the DIRCO minister, who, among other things, were communicating tonight that the newly arrived US Ambassador to South Africa, Leo Bozell, has had to be summoned to go and explain what is said to be undiplomatic conduct